Rachel here. Welcome to my Slow TV Stitchery. Well, good morning everybody. Onward and forward, I think. Honestly, the older I get, the more often I use my grandfather's phrases. Still. For those who are wondering, the music in the background is from a couple of CDs by a group called Santos Bonacci that we found playing in a street in Melbourne one year when we visited my husband's family. And I find it, I'm testing it out as stitching music. I find it very pleasant background music. Not stuff I listen to with attention, but very pleasing. It would be interesting to consider whether there would be a market for something called music to stitch by. But I know a lot of people stitch while listening to audiobooks. And I know that's something I couldn't do, because when I'm concentrating on what I'm doing, I would almost certainly lose track of the story, which would be rather a waste. I am trying to plan the next big project. There's a slight difficulty in that I have about 3 ideas in an equally vague state of readiness, and I don't know where to begin. So at some point in the next couple of weeks, I suspect I will find that I will just pick one and go with it. Amarna at this point. I need to finish the family, and you'll probably see that again in a few weeks when I've finished this. And then I need to work out how I'm going to mount all of the pieces, because when we are allowed to meet again, when we are allowed to gather again, I should like to have an exhibition. I would really like to have an exhibition of Amarna stuff that could go alongside real Egyptological materials, and perhaps get new people interested, because all of the research groups essentially need to keep going and need to have funding. And in fact, the Egypt Exploration Society, which is the group that Mary worked for, essentially were crowdfunding avant la lettre, because they worked by subscription. They had major donors, of course, but Mary says in Nefertiti Lived Here that really the foundation of having a reliable income is a lot of people giving not very much money but regularly. And it's easy to lose track of that when you have major donors screaming for credit. But it is something which is becoming something people are aware of again, because crowdfunding is such a thing these days. And anything that gives groups an opportunity to find a new potential source of revenue, a new audience, has to be good. So yes, I would very much like to finish and mount. I'm still considering the engineering of mounting these pieces. But finishing mounting and putting on display somewhere is a goal. I suspect it won't happen this year, but maybe next year. Maybe. Oh goodness, now I'm sounding like Bob Ross. Maybe. Well, there are worse things to do, aren't there? I've moved on from, oh goodness, I can't remember now what I was reading last, but I got tired of waiting for my husband to read The Light Ages, and I have started reading it myself. He's going to find that when he reads it, he's going to have to stop and explain bits to me. The contention is that medieval scholars had a more scientific approach than they're given credit for. And in fact, that this idea that in the medieval period people believed the earth was flat is a 19th century invention, along with pretty much everything else that we think to the discredit of the medieval period. It would be interesting to know whether medieval is a phrase which carries the same word, which carries the same implication in Italy and Spain, for example, because of course the early medieval period in Spain was in the period of Islamic rule, and Cordoba was a centre of learning for scholars of all nationalities and religions, it seems to me. They worked together, they wrote each other's music. It wasn't at all the way we're inclined to think it was. So it would be interesting to know whether this idea of medieval muddle, age of inconvenience, as Merlin says in the Disney Sword in the Stone, whether that's purely as a result of the Whiggish idea of history as a progression of improvement, and in order for now to be an improvement on then has to be worse. I do feel occasionally a bit testy about that. But it is certainly, there has been a great flowering of new views of history. Interesting to read how a slightly different interest can illuminate something new. Next time I decide to do some canvas work, it will not be on so fine and uneven a canvas as this. It will be on something much friendlier. I do in fact have plans in that direction. If you read my blog, you might have seen a few weeks ago some discussion of an idea for a cushion inspired by the Iron Bridge at Iron Bridge Gorge over the Severn. I had some thought of making that a stash buster, and then I thought that really no, I don't have enough of the canvas I want to use, or indeed the frame. I think I may have to go upstairs and bring down another working frame. But I didn't want to acquire the materials until I have this finished, and preferably the Amarna family as well, because if I put that off much longer, we're all going to be very fed up. I am actually, as I get to the end of this, I think very content that the gold canvas work patterning produces exactly the effect of, I suppose, diaper work that I was wanting here. There are some forms of icon painting and actually decorative work in general, which have a background of gold, which is already exotic enough, but when you look at it you realise that the gold has been patterned in various ways with an engraved or a drawn pattern over the top. And I wanted to create something of that sense of additional patterning. I think I've succeeded. But I am now going to find myself, when we are released into the wild again, trotting around with a tape measure looking for the right curved profile to attach it to so that it stands up. and I have no idea what that's going to be. Things like coffee drums aren't big enough, not tall enough. And drain pipes, it would have to be a very big drain pipe to have a section which was the right amount of curve. So we would be in the realms perhaps of civil engineering pipe work rather than builders' merchants' drain pipe. Let's see, it needs to be a bit more than 30 centimetres high, so a bit more than a foot high, and curved enough to stand up on its own, but not so curved as to create a situation in which you, if it's on the convex curve, all you see is this bit, or if it's on the concave curve, that it's dark in the middle, because that equally isn't a good thing. When will I learn to work out what I'm going to do with something before I start it? Because sometimes it matters, and sometimes I make my life so much harder than it needs to be. Although for someone who loses interest in a piece once the interesting problems are solved, maybe this is not really too surprising. What maintains an interest in a piece when the stitching is simple is, what am I going to do with it? This is coming along very nicely indeed. That's all for this session. I hope you enjoyed following along. Happy stitching!